Tonight on The Story, an undercover police raid on Portland's latest open-air fentanyl market.
Get the dealers, dry up the supply.
We give you a bird's-eye view
So I am going to go get up on the roof
of the deadly crisis below.
Start lining up, getting cash in their hands, getting the foil ready in their hands. Then you'll start seeing like a rapid exchanges. All right, he's handing some out over there. You know, it's like a whole subculture.
How does it make you feel?
Scared. I get scared.
Blair Best takes us inside the operation.
There's the people who are selling. Sometimes there's like supervisors.
To take down those responsible for peddling the powdered poison.
The guy with the blue baseball cap just passed to both of these guys.
Here's The Story.
As the sun sets in downtown Portland, a new side of the fentanyl crisis rises.
It's going to be better at 5:30, it's going to be better at 6:30. It should just keep building, so.
Portland police officers from Central Precinct
Appreciate y'all stepping up and being here.
once again
Did I miss something?
gear up to face it.
Anyways,
They use this map to track where fentanyl users gather,
So we've got groups right now on most of these intersections.
a telltale sign that dealers are also there. On this night,
there's a big group at 13 and Yamhill right now.
Officer Eli Arnold is working undercover as a spotter.
I think I just caught a deal at the medical clinic right now.
The Portland Clinic, which will soon close this downtown location to patient care, due in part because of what Officer Arnold just saw. He tells his team to arrest two people he believes were selling fentanyl right outside the clinic lobby.
It's like a Hondo City, you know, it's Fetty Row.
This woman knows one of the dealers who just got caught.
He's not out here doing terrible things. He's just out here doing what he knows to do to survive.
She watches from across the street as officers search him.
You have to survive by the moment. And so whatever it takes to get that in that moment is what you're going to do.
Officer Arnold does whatever it takes to stop them. And that means hiding on the medical clinic's roof to watch from above.
I think this guy's dealing right here, maybe. Oh, we're looking for the crowd reacting to the arrival of a dealer.
It doesn't take much.
I'll just pair of cheap binoculars.
And knowing what to look for.
Spent a few thousand hours watching these spots like this over the last few years. You get pretty good at it. You're a few hundred dealers in. You'll see circulation. So like if there's a deal in the area, they'll pass through, especially the higher volume dealers, they'll sort of rapidly supply the group and then they just move. And they go on looking for the next. The faster they can sort of deal it out and move, the less their exposure, the quicker they make their money. This guy over here in black just accepted a knife from the guy with the red beanie. Go check this guy out. Another thing you'll see is stolen property being like offered for trade. And so sometimes you'll see dealers will be acquiring like clothing and stuff over the course of the night. So they'll have like a pair of jeans over a shoulder and shoes strung over another shoulder.
On some nights, Officer Arnold watches from the roof for 6 hours. And he's not just looking for drug deals.
2831, there appears to be an overdose occurring between Taylor and Yamhill and 13.
They have no remorse, the dealers.
That certainly doesn't seem like it.
A small crowd tries to revive the man curled up in gray.
Is there an ETA on the ambulance? Sounds like our ambulance is 10 blocks out.
Someone in the crowd gave the man Narcan, an overdose reversal drug, throwing him into instant withdrawal.
All right, cancel the bike. They already Narcaned him, and medical's coming.
The overdose pushed the crowd 2 blocks west, near Lincoln High School in Providence Park. Before long, they're back.
This person in gray just bought some. I don't know who he got it from, but he's got it cupped in his hand right now. This guy's getting a needle out for him. All right, he's handing some out over there. The guy with the blue baseball cap just passed to both of these guys. He's showing it in his palm right there, blue baseball cap.
Officer Arnold watched the man in the blue baseball cap accept cash for fentanyl powder, enough proof to call in the bike squad waiting nearby.
The guy next to him, he provided drugs to, so you can stop that guy for PCS.
Back at police headquarters,
This is the other fentanyl that we found.
Officer Donald Matthew records the fentanyl and cash he seized during an arrest at Southwest 17th and Yamhill.
So there's a baggie there. There's another rock, a decent-sized rock right there. It's good, to get a bus like this,
It's why they're here. a mission that only ends
Hey, what's up?
once police have confiscated the dealer's drug supply for the night.
We got a good group of users out just waiting.
Blair Best,
Yeah, we're up here, ready.
KGW News.
Blair joins me now. Great story. What was that like for you?
So it was cool, right? It was cool to be a part of and to see from that perspective. But let's not forget, Portland police officers are doing missions like this, targeting drug dealers all the time. And they're constantly changing their tactics. They're arresting them on foot, on bikes, in patrol cars, and now on rooftops. So their response is always evolving.
And after they make an arrest, what do they do with the people?
So they bring them to Central Precinct and put them in holding cells. Officers, they didn't want us to show that part, but the space that all this happens in is a lot smaller than I anticipated. I was actually standing in front of one of the holding cells. I had no idea until one of the dealers started rattling the door behind me trying to get out. The dealers are also, they're very young. The two that were there at the time we were, they're just 17, 18 years old. So once they're brought to Central, they're interviewed, and police officers try to get them to admit that they knew they were selling fentanyl and that they know how dangerous the drug is. Because if they can admit those two things, they can add a reckless endangerment charge, which holds greater penalty down the road. Another interesting thing here is oftentimes after the interview, they're handed a court date and released. And that's why Officer Arnold tells us he sometimes sees the same dealer back out on the streets in the same shift.
There was one time where a high volume dealer doing this caught him, and I was still up in the spot, and he came back. Like, he got out of jail fast enough that he showed back up while I was still there. And I've seen him multiple times since.
So the presiding judge here in Multnomah County actually recently changed those restrictions. So in certain drug cases, dealers cannot be released until they see a judge in court, but that's not the case for everybody.
And they're seeing a lot of drug users out there. Whatever happened to arresting drug users?
Yeah, I had that same question, and the answer is rather simple. They basically, if they were to stop every single user that they see, it would take the whole night, and they honestly don't have enough officers to do that. But it does beg the question, are they sending the wrong message by just passing these users who are blatantly using fentanyl and sending a message that it is still okay to use in downtown Portland?
I feel like what we found is most effective is get the dealers, dry up the supply. That also kind of ruins the spot for the users. And after we pick those dealers out, then we will just start generally applying more pressure, users and everybody, to really just send the message of like, this spot's you're too vulnerable selling or using here. And once we get to that stage, it does sort of just finish it off.
All right, so in that one night that we were there, Portland police officers, they seized more than 64 grams of fentanyl, 3 firearms, and more than $2,000 in cash.
Wow. What a great look into what it's like to take down a drug corner like that. Great stuff. Thanks, Blair. Great as always. Now to Oregon's historic 2024 wildfire season. The state is so behind on bills to contractors who fought those fires that Governor Kotek is calling lawmakers back to Salem for a special session in just over 2 weeks on December 12th. The governor is given that power through the state constitution. She wants lawmakers to find $218 million to get those bills paid by the end of the year. According to the governor's office, 1.9 million acres burned this year. That's triple the 10-year average of 640,000 acres. All in all, it cost around $350 million. And while more than half of that eventually will be paid for by the feds for disaster relief, the governor wants the bills paid ASAP. Lawmakers are already scheduled to be in Salem from December 10th through the 12th for regularly scheduled committee hearings called legislative days. So now they have some more pressing business to accomplish on the 12th before the long session begins on Tuesday, January 21st. Now let's get to part 2 of my conversation with Dr. Benjamin Hoffman, a pediatrician at Doernbecher Hospital here in Portland and the current president of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Last night, we talked about vaccine hesitancy and what can be done about it. We showed you these stats on cases of whooping cough. In Washington, 1,193 cases were reported at the beginning of this month, compared to just 51 during the same period the year before. In Oregon, as of November 19th, 850 cases reported, compared to just 33 the year before. Many of those cases are among people or children who were not vaccinated. Trust between families and doctors was a big point that he made. You can find that full conversation over on the KGW YouTube page. But last night I promised a part 2 regarding our conversation about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In case you missed it, President-elect Trump picked RFK to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. It is a massive $2 trillion agency. It administers enormous health insurance programs like Medicaid and Medicare and the Affordable Care Act. Kennedy must be confirmed by the Senate before he can take charge of the department. But in the meantime, he has certainly raised the profile of those who question vaccines in America. Kennedy helped co-found one of the country's most prominent anti-vaccine groups and has repeatedly questioned research behind vaccine safety. He's also repeated false claims about vaccines causing autism. Counter that with Dr. Hoffman, who believes deeply in the power of vaccines, that they work, that they are safe, and that they save lives. Given that, I just couldn't resist asking him to share his thoughts about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. potentially running the Department of Health and Human Services.
It is not my role as a pediatrician, certainly in my role as a professor here at OHSU or in my role with the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'm not going to comment on a specific nomination. That's the job of the Senate, and that's why we elect really smart people like Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley to help make those decisions. When I think specifically about RFK, we actually have many places where we agree. Concerns about nutrition, concerns about the burden of chronic illness for children in this country. We may disagree about how we think about the origins and what some of the mechanisms for addressing those issues might be, but there is some common ground. We will always go back, and when I say we, pediatricians in the American Academy of Pediatrics will always go back to policy and science, and we look forward to working with an administration and to public health officials who are willing to acknowledge the settled science and address the needs of kids and families and communities in a way that will protect them based on what we know to be true and not based on fear and innuendo and conjecture and rumor.
Although he's probably one of the most prominent vaccine skeptics.
Indeed, but he's built that he's built that in concert with I think there's a misconception about how large the actual,
shall we say, community?
Yeah, the actual community of anti-vaxxers is. The majority of the information, especially on social media, comes from a very small group of people that just have a lot of reach, and the fear that's sown there, it is hard it can be difficult for families, for people to shake in the same way that we've seen that and a lot of that has to do with the role of social media and the fact that, as I mentioned before, most of that is not fact checked. And while it's not fair to blame the social media platforms for this, their practices, including algorithms and things like autoplay and endless scrolling, feed in that keep people stuck to that platform, help drag users into the abyss of misinformation and disinformation that can be hard to get out of.
Yeah. All right, but back to the question. As a pediatrician, if you don't want to talk with your official big hat on, doesn't it make it harder to talk to families about vaccines if there's someone in the top role of the federal government who's saying, I don't believe the vaccines work?
I think there are a lot of challenges to, and there are a lot of challenges to working with families around who might be vaccine hesitant. And I think the more noise there is, the more legitimacy that is given to a lot of the fear mongering, that can make it more complicated. As I said, we're committed to working with whoever we have to work with, whether it's somebody who there's fundamental agreement with, or somebody with whom there might be some disagreement. And my hope is that an opportunity for conversation and an honest discussion about what we actually know, as opposed to what people might think or choose to believe and what they fear.
Interesting stuff. Coming up next on The Story, there are 6 new tax districts in the city of Portland. They're called a TIF district. What on earth does that mean, and where does that money go? We'll explain it all when The Story returns. The Portland City Council recently approved the creation of 6 new tax districts throughout the city, where they're hoping to generate new revenue to invest back into those neighborhoods. They're called Tax Increment Financing Districts, or TIF. You can surprise your neighbors by knowing that. It's an idea that's been around for a while in Oregon, and here's how it works. The council approves the boundaries of the district, and when that happens, the properties inside those districts, they have their taxable values sort of frozen in time, which is not to say the property owners never see their bills rise. The bill will go up as the property gets more valuable, but the property owners pay their bill like they always do. But here's what's different. The new amount of tax money paid above that frozen value, it's called an increment. Well, that money goes into a separate fund, the TIF fund. So if you live in a TIF district and you pay, for example, $4,000 a year for your property taxes, the next year it goes up by $100, you'd pay $4,100, and that extra $100 goes into that TIF fund. That $100 is managed by Prosper Portland and the Portland Housing Bureau for new projects. Here's Lisa Obwolf from Prosper Portland to explain what that money pays for.
things like the Pearl District. So we had a development agreement with a developer who owned a number of acres that before the Pearl District was the Pearl District. And where we invested as a city is we invested in things like the park sequence. So if you think about Tanner Springs and Jameson and Neighborhood Park, we invested in the streetcar, so we were the match for pursuing other funding for the streetcar. We invested in affordable housing. So through the Housing Bureau, we invested in affordable housing to make sure that there was mixed income housing. But those tend to be like very like 20 plus year partnerships where we're investing in the infrastructure that's needed to serve the density of development that's coming into sites that largely have either been industrial or just underbuilt, like the post office has been underbuilt. So that's usually how we come in with infrastructure. What are other examples? Like we helped build the Saturday Market permanent home down in Waterfront Park. So we often are working with kind of nonprofits to support them.
So as you mentioned, the money often goes to large-scale infrastructure projects, but it can also be used on smaller-scale projects for those things within the TIF. Prosper Portland says the money also supports things like Portland's cultural institutions, museums, and things like the Portland Mercado. And the money can be used on a micro level as well. So if you're a small business owner, you can apply for a matching grant, or property owners can apply for loans for property improvements. Portland's new TIF districts are all over town. Here's a look at them. There's one that stretches from Old Town to most of downtown Portland, a couple in the central east side, and 3 big ones in East Portland. We talked to one of the city's new incoming councilors from District 1, that's East Portland, to see what they think. City Councilor-elect Jamie Dunphy has some reservations about it.
I have some deep skepticism about TIF in general. I think that it has the potential to be a great tool that can bring targeted, geographically based development and opportunity to communities that aren't seeing that naturally through the business cycle. But I also recognize that it requires a lot of leadership and follow through that has been lacking in a lot of the previous TIF districts. I lived in Lentz when the Lentz TIF district came about, and there were promises of walkable, safe communities with community-based assets and small businesses and interesting reasons for people to want to be in the public. And instead, we got a Planet Fitness and an urgent care. It is not the walkable community. It is not small business friendly. It is not really the asset that was promised.
Dunphy says the east side needs affordable housing that's big enough for families with kids, so he'd like to see more of that come out of these TIF funds. This is a 30-year project, so it'll likely be a while before we see big changes. Keep it right here. I'm back with a special announcement right after this. Well, that's the end of our show for tonight. A programming note for you. Our show will return on Monday next week because of Seattle Kraken hockey tomorrow, and then the holiday later this week. Also, this is my last night anchoring the story. Saying goodbye is so awkward and hard. I'm actually taping this ahead of time because I worried if I tried to do it live, I'd end up just an emotional mess and probably not be able to get a word out. And I did want you to know how much I've enjoyed anchoring this show. I've loved our deep dive interviews and long form stories. I loved giving you the facts and then laying my opinion on you. And I loved getting your feedback. I'm not disappearing though. The station has asked me to return to reporting for the next couple of weeks, and so I will. As far as who's going to take over the anchor slot as on this show, an announcement will be made in the coming weeks. Evan Watson and Blair Best will fill in for the remainder of this year. And the real genius of the show, executive producer Colton Weekly, he's going to continue to run things behind the scene. In mid-December, I'll be done here at KGW after 34 years, leaving for a job with the incoming district attorney for Multnomah County, Nathan Vasquez. He has a lot of great ideas, and I want to help amplify those. I also want to shine a light on the work his office is doing every day. So, you'll probably see me around Portland at Multnomah County, and if you do, please stop me and say hello. In the meantime, have a great night and a peaceful Thanksgiving, and remember the story, our story, that never ends. Good night.